Hello, welcome to the Historian channel. If you write, leave your like gratitude. So let's go. The man known to history as Leonardo da Vinci was born on 15th April 1452 in the small town of Vinci, or, according to some scholars, in the village of Anciano, near Vinci, in the Tuscany region, now part of Italy, about 50 kilometers from Florence. Leonardo's father, Sir Piero da Vinci, was born in 1426 and belonged to an upper middle class, landowning family that had lived in Vinci since the 13th century. Due to the family's long-standing connection to the area, they adopted the village's name as their surname, preceded by the prefix da, meaning from, as in Leonardo from Vinci. This was a common practice at the time. The title Sir, as in Sir Piero, was an honorific used for lawyers. Sir Piero was a respected notary, responsible for formalizing documents and performing a role similar to that of a lawyer or clerk. He spent much of his time in Florence but, at some point in 1451, became romantically involved with Leonardo's mother. The couple conceived Leonardo out of wedlock, which was particularly scandalous due to Piero's social status. However, Leonardo's parents disregarded the potential stigma and openly acknowledged his birth. Until recently, little was known about Leonardo's mother. It is believed that she was a servant named Caterina, possibly Caterina di Meolippi, a 15-year-old orphan living near Vinci. Another theory, presented in recent publications and in speculative work by Italian literature professor Carlo Vex, suggests that Caterina was an enslaved woman from the Caucasus. This theory is supported by a document signed by Sir Piero in the autumn of 1452, in which he freed an enslaved woman named Caterina. Although Leonardo would become a genius in science, painting, architecture, and many other fields, he was born into a provincial life as an illegitimate child. Historians propose that this status may have driven his pursuit of varied interests, as it barred him from inheriting the rights and privileges associated with his father's position. Leonardo spent the first year of his life with his mother, Caterina, but was later raised by his paternal grandparents, Antonio and Lucia, who were approximately 80 and 60 years old, respectively. From that point on, Leonardo rarely saw his mother or father again. His father, Sir Piero, lived and worked in Florence, where he later remarried. Caterina, on the other hand, also married another man and had 5 more children. Throughout his life, Sir Piero married 4 times and had a total of 11 children. Unlike other children from wealthy families, Leonardo, being illegitimate, did not have access to a formal education in Latin and was not allowed to attend university. However, he was taught arithmetic, how to read and write in Italian, and how to play the lyre. He also learned farming techniques from his young uncle Francesco, an experience that likely fueled his lifelong fascination with science and nature. His early education took place in his father's household, combining formal lessons with incidental learning from the local environment, such as observing the basic mechanics of water wheels and pottery making. In 1464, when Leonardo was 12 years old, Sir Piero's first wife, Albira, passed away. The following year, he remarried Francesca di Ser Giuliano Landredini, who became Leonardo's second stepmother. After this marriage and the death of his grandparents, Leonardo moved to Florence to live with his father. At the time, Florence was a major artistic and cultural hub of the Renaissance, with a population of about 100,000 people in the 1460s. The Renaissance, which literally means rebirth in French, refers to the renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman scholarship and art, as well as the revival of European culture after what was seen as the academic and artistic decline of the medieval period. The term was coined in 1855 by Jules Michelet in his work of the same name, where he argued that this period represented the revitalization of classical writings, artwork, and related themes adapted to meet the socio-political demands of the time. In parts of Italy, nationalistic references to the Roman Empire were often made to highlight the impressive cultural heritage of these lands. However, it is important to note that the term Renaissance is considered Eurocentric. While this period, spanning the 14th to 17th centuries, is seen as a rebirth of European art and learning in contrast to the so-called Dark Ages, other regions, such as Asia and the Islamic world, were also flourishing culturally and intellectually during the same time. Empires outside Europe had already achieved significant innovations and advancements in scholarship during the period when Europe was largely stagnant. However, the term Renaissance is still useful for describing the broader cultural and intellectual movement of which Leonardo da Vinci became a central figure. During the Renaissance, Italy was not a unified country but rather a collection of powerful city-states surrounded by rural landscapes. These city-states frequently experienced conflicts, including wars between the urban elite and the Papal States, a vast territory controlled by the Pope and the Catholic Church, complete with its own army. At that time, the ruling class typically originated from one of two groups: the old nobility, who had retained their power and lands from the feudal era, or the rising bourgeoisie, who amassed wealth in cities through banking, shipping, and other trades. Within Florence, divisions and factional disputes were also common, as evidenced by the city's urban layout during the Renaissance. Historical maps and written accounts reveal that neighborhoods in Florence were a mix of families from diverse backgrounds, with no sharp income disparities. Families from different trades, including those of noble origin who had lived in the same area for centuries, coexisted in close proximity. This arrangement, a remnant of feudal times, provided mutual support and protection when necessary. Such an environment fostered a culture in which people sought status symbols to display their wealth and societal standing. In Florence, these symbols were often rooted in the arts. Wealthy private citizens invested heavily in sculptures, paintings, and jewelry, using these as markers of their taste and affluence. This dynamic was a driving force behind Florence's emergence as a hub of Renaissance art and culture. It was within this vibrant artistic atmosphere that Leonardo found the opportunity to establish himself as an artisan. Florence, one of Italy's most powerful city-states, attracted many migrants from rural areas during the 15th century, including young Leonardo. There, he adapted to city life, which included strict after-dark curfews and the use of impenetrable locks and security measures on buildings. Additionally, Florence was a walled city, reflecting the need for protection in a time marked by wars, political intrigue, and social turbulence. This environment shaped Leonardo's early experiences and provided the backdrop for his development as one of the Renaissance's most iconic figures. Epidemics of plague and periods of famine periodically afflicted the population of Florence during this era, creating significant fear and uncertainty. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the old market and public squares became central hubs for political gatherings, community interactions, and cultural exchange. For Leonardo, these squares likely provided invaluable opportunities to observe the human form in everyday life and potentially connect with patrons or clients for his art. Among the most influential figures in the artistic and political world of 14th to 16th century Florence were members of the powerful Medici family, originally humble peasant farmers from Tuscany. In the 14th century, the Medicis migrated to Florence in search of economic opportunities. Over the following centuries, they rose to prominence, with family members establishing connections to both the French monarchy and the papacy. Importantly for Leonardo's story, the Medici family, along with other wealthy families, became renowned patrons of the arts. The tradition of Medici patronage began with Cosimo di' Medici, born in 1389. He not only secured the family's political legitimacy at a time when bankers faced widespread distrust, but also initiated their legacy of supporting the arts. Cosimo had a particular interest in architecture, exemplified by his support for Filippo Brunelleschi's design and construction of the iconic dome of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, the Florence Cathedral, completed around 1436. Renaissance Florence was a thriving hub for artistic and intellectual achievements, driven in part by the aristocracy's enthusiasm for art and their active participation in cultural development. This vibrant cultural scene was also influenced by a renewed fascination with classical Greek and Roman history and the rise of humanist values. It is important to note that Renaissance-era humanism differed from the modern atheistic movement of the same name. Instead, It was an intellectual and aesthetic philosophy emphasizing the centrality of humans and the enrichment of the human experience through art and literature, often inspired by classical ideals. Leonardo da Vinci, along with contemporaries like Michelangelo and Raphael, is considered one of the leading figures of the High Renaissance. This term refers to the period from the late 15th to the mid-16th century, during which Renaissance art and science reached an unparalleled level of achievement. However, during the early phase of his life in 1464, Leonardo was not yet the multifaceted Renaissance man he would later become. At that time, he was simply the illegitimate son of a notary and a young mother, beginning to find his place in the dynamic world of Renaissance Florence. Leonardo da Vinci, soon to become an artist's apprentice, faced limitations in pursuing his father's career due to his illegitimate status. Upon arriving in Florence, he could not follow in his father's footsteps and become a lawyer. However, thanks to his father's connections, Leonardo secured an apprenticeship with the Florentine artist Andrea del Verrocchio at the age of 14. While apprenticeships typically began around the age of 12, this opportunity marked a significant turning point in Leonardo's life. Andrea del Verrocchio, born in 1435 in Florence, was a prominent artist and the official sculptor for the powerful Medici family. Initially trained as a goldsmith, Verrocchio eventually mastered bronze and marble casting, skills highly valued in 15th century Florence. He operated a workshop, known as a bottega, which functioned as an art factory, producing a wide array of creations, including artworks, theater costumes, and even tombstones. Between 1464 and 1473, Verrocchio was commissioned to craft Cosimo di' Medici's floor tomb in the Basilica di San Lorenzo, as well as the tombs of Cosimo's sons, Piero and Giovanni. These high-profile and lucrative commissions elevated Verrocchio's influence, establishing his workshop as a sought-after center for notable clients. The bottega handled a diverse range of orders, showcasing Verrocchio's versatility as an artist. Among his many works, Verrocchio designed and created the monumental bronze sculpture Christ and Saint Thomas, which he worked on for 16 years. Completed in 1483, this sculpture was installed on the exterior of the Orsa Michel, a church originally built in the early 1st century and later rebuilt in the 14th century. In addition to his success as a sculptor, Verrocchio was an accomplished painter. He had been trained by the renowned Florentine master Fra Filippo Lippi, who was born in Florence around 1406. Lippi, a celebrated painter of the earlier Renaissance generation, had once been a priest and enjoyed significant patronage for his artistic works. By the Medici family, Fra Filippo Lippi was renowned for his frescoes and altarpieces, including the Madonna and Child, painted in the 1440s. However, his personal life was scandalous. He was known to have had an affair with a nun while he was still a priest. This indiscretion led to his arrest and torture, though his life was ultimately spared due to the intervention of Cosimo di' Medici. It was within this artistic tradition that young Leonardo da Vinci began his training. At the time, artists were viewed more as craftsmen than as independent creators. Clients commissioned specific works from workshops, such as paintings, sculptures, engravings, or bronzes, expecting the final product to meet their detailed specifications. This environment required apprentices like Leonardo to learn a wide array of skills, including paint preparation and application, stonemasonry, carving, bronze casting, and drawing. Additionally, they were trained in mathematics, engineering, and music, skills essential for their craft. As an apprentice under Verrocchio, Leonardo is believed by some scholars to have contributed to Verrocchio's painting the Baptism of Christ, circa 1472, particularly the angel figure. He is also thought to have painted the fish on a string and the dog in Tobias and the Angel, circa 1470. Some historians suggest that Verrocchio, perhaps intimidated or inspired by Leonardo's exceptional talent and mastery of color, abandoned painting entirely to focus on sculpture and goldsmithing. Leonardo's early works as an apprentice were executed using tempera, a popular painting medium during the Renaissance. Tempera was made by mixing powdered pigments with egg yolk, which served as a binder, and water. Leonardo's experience with tempera during this period may have fueled his later fascination with oil painting. Oil painting, a technique spreading from the Netherlands to Italy during the Renaissance, had been popularized by artists like Jan van Eyck. However, it originated as far back as the 7th century in Afghanistan. This medium was made by combining powdered pigments with oils such as linseed to create a smooth paste. Artists could adjust the consistency by adding more medium, allowing for greater flexibility and precision. This technique enabled the creation of more nuanced shadows and gradations, contributing to the depth and realism characteristic of Renaissance art. Gave rise to a style that emphasized depth, distance, and perspective. After training under Verrocchio for 6 years, Leonardo completed his apprenticeship in 1472 at the age of 20. Shortly after, he joined the Compagnia di San Luca, Company of St. Luke, the Painters' Guild of Florence. During the Renaissance, artists were required to be guild members to open their own workshops. Although Leonardo joined the guild and was officially recognized as a qualified, independent artist, he continued to work as an assistant in Verrocchio's workshop for another 5 years, until 1477. During this period, Leonardo created his first solo painting, the Annunciation, dated between 1472 and 1475, which is now housed in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. This work has sparked debate among scholars. Some question its attribution to Leonardo, citing uneven tones and colors, while others assert that it is undoubtedly his work but created during his youth, before he had mastered the scientific principles that later defined his art. In the Annunciation, Leonardo's careful attention to nature is evident, as he uses it not just as a backdrop, like many of his contemporaries, but as an integral element to establish the painting's mood. Around 1474, Leonardo painted the portrait Ginevra di Vinci, now displayed in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. This portrait depicts 16-year-old Ginevra di Vinci, the daughter of a wealthy banker and a practicing poet. Given that Ginevra married Luigi Niccolini in January 1474, it is speculated that the portrait was commissioned to commemorate her marriage. Days, Leonardo once again failed to complete the work. The Adoration of the Magi, which remains unfinished, was intended for the Augustinian monks of San Donato in Scopito, a location just outside Florence. Despite its incomplete state, the work showcases Leonardo's early mastery of composition and perspective, particularly in the dynamic arrangement of figures and the detailed architectural background. The earlier portrait of Ginevra di Vinci, which may have been commissioned to celebrate her wedding, also raises intriguing questions about its origins. Some scholars suggest it was ordered by one of Ginevra's admirers, possibly Lorenzo di Medici, the prominent Florentine leader and patron of the arts, who was the grandson of Cosimo di Medici. The portrait's reverse side features the inscription, "Beauty adorns virtue," in Latin, encircled by a sprig of juniper, a reference to her name, as juniper is Ginevra in Italian. The back of the painting is further adorned with laurel and palm leaves. Infrared scanning has revealed another Latin motto, virtue and honor, which was associated with Bernardo Bembo, a Venetian ambassador to Florence. Bembo is believed to have shared a platonic, admiring relationship with Ginevra, a common form of courtly affection during the Renaissance. This connection has led some to theorize that Bembo, not Lorenzo, may have commissioned the portrait, though this remains unproven. Between 1474 and 1478, Leonardo created Madonna of the Carnation, also known as Virgin with the Vase of Flowers or the Munich Madonna, currently housed in the Alte Pinakothek Gallery in Munich, Germany. This painting bears stylistic similarities to the Annunciation, particularly in the intricate rendering of the Madonna's braided hair and the delicate flowers in the vase. Unfortunately, extensive damage from earlier restoration attempts makes parts of the painting difficult to analyze. For instance, the Madonna's head was heavily repainted with an excess of oil, leading some scholars to speculate that this was done using Flemish techniques, raising doubts about the painting's authenticity as a Da Vinci original. Some suggest it could be a Flemish copy. Leonardo opened his own workshop in Florence in 1477. His first independent commission came on 10 January 1478, when he was hired to paint a nativity scene for the chapel of San Bernardo. Despite being paid in advance, Leonardo never completed the work, possibly due to his tendency to become distracted by new ideas and projects. The commission was eventually reassigned to Domenico Ghirlandaio and later completed by Filippino Lippi. During this period, Leonardo struggled to secure the steady patronage necessary to sustain his career. However, he did take on at least one apprentice, Paolo da Florence, about whom little is known. Historical records suggest Paolo was skilled in marquetry, the craft of creating intricate decorative designs on furniture using veneer. Leonardo's letters also mention that Paolo kept bad company and was eventually forced to flee Florence. By July 1481, Leonardo had received another significant commission from the Augustinian monks at San Donato in Scopito, an altarpiece to depict the adoration of the Magi. This ambitious work was supposed to celebrate the feast of the Epiphany. Although the terms of the commission required Leonardo to complete the painting within 30 days, he once again left it unfinished, leaving behind an extraordinary yet incomplete masterpiece. The majority of Leonardo's estate. The unfinished Adoration of the Magi, now housed in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, remains an iconic work, composed of a mixture of watercolor, oil, and charcoal sketches. It underwent significant conservation efforts between 2012 and 2017. Altarpieces like this were highly sought after in Florence, as both churches and private patrons often commissioned them, hoping to expedite their passage to heaven. While little is known about Leonardo's physical appearance, some have suggested that the figure on the far right of the Adoration of the Magi could be a self-portrait. Other records, however, describe him as a striking figure, tall with blue eyes. Scholars have speculated that Leonardo's tendency to leave works unfinished was due to his distractions or changing interests, though his motivations remain unclear. By the time he abandoned the Adoration of the Magi, Leonardo had already accepted a position at the court of Duke Ludovico Sforza of Milan and moved there in September 1481. It is uncertain whether Sforza personally commissioned him to be the court musician, or if he was sent as a diplomatic gift by Lorenzo di Medici. At the time, Milan had a population of around 80,000, and in 1480, it had undergone a political shift when Ludovico Sforza seized control of the city, assuming regency over his 10-year-old nephew, Gian Galeazzo. Ludovico's political acumen allowed him to form key alliances with Lorenzo di Medici of Florence and King Ferdinand I of Naples, both through marriage and diplomacy. Eager to elevate Milan to the cultural status of Florence, Ludovico sought to patronize Leonardo as part of this endeavor. A psalm court musician, Leonardo played a silver lyre shaped like a horse's head, a striking and unusual instrument likely designed to attract attention. Historians have discovered unsent letters in Leonardo's journals, where he boasted of other skills he could offer the court, such as the construction of war machines. Leonardo's journals are filled with sketches of innovative designs, including a giant catapult, a multi-barreled gun, flamethrowers, and even an early tank. At the time, Milan was at war with Venice and was a well-established manufacturer of weaponry. These military designs eventually led to Leonardo's appointment as an engineer for the Duke. In 1489, Ludovico commissioned Leonardo to create a bronze statue of a horse to honor his father, Francisco Sforza. Unfortunately, due to a shortage of bronze during the war, the statue was never completed. During his years in Milan, Leonardo also took on another apprentice, Giovanni Giacomo di Pietro Caprotti, known as Salai, who began his apprenticeship at the age of 10 in 1490. Salai, whose nickname means little devil or imp, became notorious for his mischievous behavior, including theft. Many scholars believe that Leonardo and Salai had a romantic relationship during the 30 years they were together. While it is important to note that in the context of Renaissance Italy, actions now associated with homosexuality were often viewed differently, open homosexuality was still prohibited by the church. However, given the common relationships between masters and apprentices in the tradition of Greek and Roman antiquity, it is possible that Leonardo's bond with Salai had a romantic dimension. When Leonardo passed away, Salai was included in his will, receiving the majority of his estate. Leonardo also received a house and land in Milan, along with several pieces of artwork, in his will. During his time in Milan, he undertook many other projects, including designing centrally planned round churches and classical municipal buildings. He worked alongside influential architects like Donato Bramante, who was greatly influenced by the Renaissance and sought to develop new buildings inspired by the styles of ancient Athens and Rome. While no buildings directly based on Leonardo's designs have survived, several of his ideas were later modeled. In 1494, French King Charles VIII invaded Naples in an attempt to conquer the region. The following year, Venice, Milan, Rome, and Spain formed an alliance to repel the French. In July 1495, despite winning the Battle of Fornovo, France vacated Naples and the Italian territories. This retreat occurred because the French had already begun to abandon the territory in response to the massive forces assembled against them. During this time, in 1495, Ludovico Sforza commissioned Leonardo's famous fresco The Last Supper. Frescoes, a popular medium during the Renaissance, were murals painted with dry pigment directly onto wet lime plaster. The Last Supper was commissioned to be painted on the dining room wall at the monastery of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. The work took 2-3 years to complete, with the help of many assistants, though this was not considered a long time for such a project in the 15th century. Leonardo experimented with a mixture of oil paint and tempera for this fresco, but the combination made the artwork more vulnerable to the damp conditions in the monastery, contributing to its rapid degradation. By the mid-15th century, the painting had begun to deteriorate significantly. Today, The Last Supper has undergone many restoration efforts, with only about 20% of the painting remaining as originally created by Leonardo. The paint began to flake off soon after completion, partly due to the medium's composition, which included oil, tempera, and gesso, as well as the effects of humidity. In 1999, a restoration effort led by specialist Pinin Brambilla began, which took over 20 years and millions of dollars, including the removal of 5 layers of paint. The fresco is notable for several reasons. Leonardo chose to portray Judas, the traitor, alongside the other disciples, which was a departure from traditional depictions. Jesus is placed at the center of the frame, with the light illuminating the faces of the other figures coming from him, as indicated by Leonardo's use of shadow. The Last Supper, now considered one of Leonardo's greatest achievements, caused some upset at the time of its creation. His patrons were frustrated by the long time it took to complete the work, and Leonardo reportedly lost his temper with an especially impatient abbot, threatening to depict him as Judas in the fresco. During his time at the court of Ludovico, Leonardo also worked as the official portrait artist to the nobility and their families. One of Leonardo's most striking works was undertaken in his role as a portrait artist, where he was widely regarded for his ability to capture expression and emotion. He refined this technique through several studies, including explorations of both the grotesque and the beautiful, as seen in his Madonna paintings. Leonardo was also known for his distinctive style in portraiture, in which he positioned his subjects at a three-quarter view rather than a full profile. This approach allowed him to depict shadow and depth more effectively. One of his most successful portraits was that of Cecilia Dellerani, the mistress of Ludovico Sforza. In this work, he also included her dog, demonstrating his ability to capture not only human emotions but also the movement and emotion of animals. Leonardo's interest in anatomy led him to undertake several projects in which he attended and painted dissections. This was an unusual practice for an artist of his time, but it provided him with a deeper understanding of the human body's composition, enabling him to render living subjects with greater accuracy. He also completed studies examining the effect of sunlight on a subject and worked on defining shadows in precise detail, often in sketch form. In 1498, while in Milan working for Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo was appointed Ingegner Cambrale, or Chamber of Commerce Engineer. This position involved designing defenses and weaponry for Lombardy, a region in Italy, in preparation for a potential French attack. During these turbulent pre-war years, Leonardo also explored the intersection of mathematics and art. He collaborated with the mathematician Lucas Pacioli on Divina Proportion, beginning in 1496. Pacioli, born in San Spolcro in 1445, studied under Renaissance artist and mathematician Piero della Francesca. Before being invited by Ludovico Sforza to teach mathematics at his court in Milan, Pacioli worked in several cities and published works, including Summa di Arithmetica, Geometria, Proportioni et Proportionalit in 1494. The first book in Divina Proportion resulted from the collaboration between Da Vinci and Pacioli, with Leonardo providing illustrations. The book was later published as a three-book collection that explored the golden ratio, a mathematical principle used to section and divide art, architecture, and other forms to achieve the most aesthetically pleasing result. These achievements highlight Leonardo's remarkable ability to merge art and science. Not trained in what was then referred to as natural philosophy or science, Da Vinci consistently emphasized the importance of empirical observation in his acquisition of knowledge. He argued that the world could not be understood through books alone. On 5 October 1499, King Louis XII of France, a descendant of the first Duke of Milan, invaded Milan with the support of Venice. This forced Ludovico Sforza to flee the city, although he was eventually captured a year later while attempting to retake it. Louis had a claim to the city through the Visconti family, whom Ludovico had overthrown before assuming power. Following the invasion, Leonardo fled Milan with Salai and Pacioli, first stopping in Mantua to stay with the Marchioness Isabella d'Este, whom he sketched in a portrait now housed in the Louvre in Paris. The trio then moved to Venice in March 1500 before returning to Florence, where they lived together in a house. During his brief stay in Venice, Leonardo experienced life under siege, as the Ottoman Empire threatened the city during a war between 1499 and 1503. Turkish warships lay off the coast during his stay, and Leonardo offered his services to the city as a military engineer. This led him to develop designs for diving equipment, which he believed could be used by Venetian troops in assaults on Ottoman vessels, as well as several forms of underwater defense to scuttle ships before they could reach the harbors, preventing the landing of an invasion force. Although these designs were extraordinary, they lacked practical application and were rarely attempted. In April 1500, Leonardo returned to Florence, though it was no longer the same city he had left. The Medici family, who had controlled the city for generations, had been ousted following Lorenzo di Medici's son, Piero the Unfortunate, political blunder in 1494. Piero had met Charles VIII on the battlefield during his invasion of Naples and ceded multiple fortresses without the approval of Florence's governing body, the Signoria. While Leonardo had struggled to secure a patron when establishing his own studio and career in Florence 20 years earlier, the changing political climate now saw him as a great master of the heroic style that was in vogue. This respect led to numerous commissions and jobs. For instance, when the artist Filipino heard that Da Vinci might be interested in an altarpiece project he had been commissioned for, Filipino withdrew, allowing Leonardo to take on the project if he wished. Leonardo lived at the monastery of Santissima Annunziata, where he was commissioned to paint the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, another work he ultimately failed to finish. In 1502, Leonardo was appointed military engineer to Cesare Borgia, who is now widely known for his association with and writings by the Italian statesman Niccolò Machiavelli. At this time, Borgia was a Cesare Borgia, born in 1475, was the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI and served as the commander of the Pope's armies, using the forces to attempt to seize control of central Italy. Alongside his father, Cesare sought to establish himself as an Italian prince and reassert the Papal State's control over the region. After a strategic marriage to Charlotte d'Albret, the sister of the King of Navarre, and his appointment as Duke of Valentinois by King Louis XII, Cesare combined French and Papal forces to establish dominance. However, after ordering the strangulation of Vitalo Vitali, Leonardo's dear friend, Cesare fell from favor. He left his position and returned to Florence. In 1503, following the death of his father, Cesare Borgia lost power, was imprisoned in Spain, and ultimately died in battle in 1507. During this turbulent period, Leonardo continued to produce some of his most celebrated works and demonstrated a remarkable talent for cartography. He created a highly detailed town plan of Imola, an Italian city, marking the first time the city had been mapped in such detail. Leonardo also developed plans to connect Florence to the sea via the Arno River, creating detailed models of water currents and flow. Though the project had military significance, it was eventually abandoned. After the Florentine Republic's victory over the Medicis, officials ordered celebratory frescoes to commemorate the city's victories in battle. The Battle of Anghiari, 1440, and the Battle of Cesena, 1364, were chosen as subjects. Michelangelo was commissioned to paint the Battle of Cesena, while Leonardo was tasked with the Battle of Anghiari. The Battle of Anghiari had been fought for a single day in the small Tuscan town of Anghiari, between Milan and a coalition of Florence and the Pope's armies, solidifying the power of the Florentine Republic in the region. Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti, born in Caprice, Tuscany, in 1475, was 29 years old when he and Leonardo, aged 51, were both commissioned by Florentine officials to produce significant works. Michelangelo's ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, one of his most famous works, took 4 years to complete, finishing in 1508. Another notable work, his statue of David, was completed in 1494 and displayed at the Piazza della Signoria. Like Leonardo, Michelangelo spent much of his life in and around Florence, where they both left an indelible mark on the Renaissance. Both frescoes remain unfinished. In Leonardo's case, his experimentation got the better of him when he tried a new method of painting frescoes by mixing oil paint with tempera. Michelangelo, on the other hand, was called away to work in Rome. Eventually, both of these incomplete works were covered up by the artist Giorgio Vasari in the 1560s. Leonardo and Michelangelo had something of a rivalry, and their characters were often contrasted. Michelangelo was described as boastful, rude, and untidy, while Leonardo was quiet, thoughtful, and elegant. The two had an acrimonious relationship, with Michelangelo frequently criticizing Leonardo for his many unfinished works. In 1503, Leonardo began painting one of his most famous works, the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa, or Mona, short for Madonna, is believed to be a portrait of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of silk merchant Francesco del Giocondo, though this has always been contested. Leonardo worked on this piece for 4 years, applying many layers of oil paint and continuing to add to it throughout his life. Leonardo evidently had great affection for the painting, keeping it for the rest of his life. This is intriguing, as a commissioned portrait would typically be handed over to the sitter upon completion. The Mona Lisa remains arguably the most famous painting in the world. In fact, it was stolen on 21 August 1911 by Italian painter Vincenzo Peruggia, but it was recovered 2 years later when Peruggia tried to sell it. He was subsequently imprisoned for 18 months. The painting is currently housed in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Around 1507, Leonardo was appointed as the court artist of King Louis XII of France, who was based in Milan after wresting control from the Sforzas. While employed by the French king, Leonardo was paid a salary and also painted and designed sets for plays. Despite being court artist, his principal patron in Milan during the years of French control was Charles d'Amboise, the Lord of Chaumont. Charles was a French nobleman, Marshal of France, and governor of Milan from 1506 to 1511. Although never constructed, Leonardo created plans for a villa for Charles and also sketched designs for an oratory to be built for the French nobleman. The Church of Santa Maria alla Fontana, combining Leonardo da Vinci's love of science with art, featured lavish gardens, hydraulic devices, and aviaries. Da Vinci's architectural plans and drawings for d'Amboise included a loggia, or covered exterior corridor. Some scholars suggest that these designs were influenced by the Villa Poggio Reale, the home of the governor of Calabria, which was designed by Lorenzo di Medici and realized in 1488 by Giuliano da Maiano. During this period, Leonardo's tendency for unfinished projects began to catch up with him. In May 1506, the Signoria received a letter from D'Amboise requesting that Leonardo return to Milan to finish an unspecified work of art that he had failed to deliver. Unfortunately, Leonardo also owed unfinished work to the city of Florence, particularly the Battle of Anghiari fresco. The Signoria granted him permission to travel to Milan to complete his work for D'Amboise. However, by September 1506, D'Amboise wrote again, asking that Leonardo stay longer in Milan to finish his projects. This request was denied, but in true Leonardo fashion, he remained in Milan anyway, returning to Florence only to settle a personal lawsuit with his brother regarding their deceased father, who had passed away in 1504. During this time, Leonardo took on several new apprentices, though his own artistic output as a painter was limited. His new apprentices included young men such as Cesaro di Sesto, Giampetrino, Bernardino Luini, who later became a noted fresco painter, and Giovanni Francesco di Melgi, a Milanese nobleman who would play an important role in the remainder of Leonardo's life. Like with Salai, most scholars agree that Melgi and Leonardo were romantically involved, with both Salai and Melgi serving as Leonardo's muses throughout his life. They lived together for many years and traveled with him from Milan to France and beyond. However, despite speculations by scholars such as Sigmund Freud regarding Leonardo's sexuality, there are no explicit confirmations in his journals, sketches, or works to definitively confirm this. It was during this second period in Milan that Leonardo frequently traveled around the countryside, observing nature and fueling his growing interest in geology. As recorded in his notebooks from the autumn of 1508, Leonardo began taking his first notes on geology and botany as he sought to understand the natural world more deeply. Leonardo da Vinci questioned how fossils and shells could be found so far from the shore. He argued that the land must have once been underwater, instead of adhering to the common belief of the time that floodwaters had carried the evidence inland. As late as 1510, Da Vinci worked on the unfinished painting Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, now housed in the Louvre. Some parts of this painting remain incomplete, such as the coverings of the Virgin's legs, while other sections are clearly the work of one of his apprentices, rather than Da Vinci himself. On 10th March 1511, Charles d'Amboise died, and Generals Giacomo Trivulzio and Gaston de Foix took control of Milan. During this period, Da Vinci was commissioned by General Trivulzio to sculpt an equestrian statue to be placed in a tomb that Trivulzio had donated to the San Nazaro Maggiore Church. However, this commission was ultimately revoked. Scholars highlight two challenges that Da Vinci faced when sketching designs for Trivulzio's statue, determining how to fill the space beneath the horse's belly and how to position the rider. In attempting to solve these problems, Da Vinci may have studied the classical statue of a horse and rider known as the Regisol. This pre-1st century bronze statue depicted an emperor or king riding a horse, believed to be King Theodoric of the Ostrogoths, who reigned in the 5th century AD. The statue, originally located in Ravenna, was moved to Pavia in Italy within a century of its creation, possibly by Emperor Charlemagne. While the exact date of its creation is unclear, the Regisol was a significant inspiration for Renaissance artists. Sadly, the Regisol was destroyed on 16 May 1796 by Jacobins celebrating the arrival of Napoleon's army, who saw the statue as a symbol of tyranny. However, parts of the statue, including its base, survived until 1811. In 1937, to commemorate the bimillennial anniversary of Emperor Augustus, the director of the Brera Academy, Francisco Messina, commissioned a replica of the destroyed Regisol. This replica was placed in the same location, in front of the Vicolo Regisol in Pavia. Although Leonardo had been studying human anatomy since the 1480s during his second Milanese period, he devoted much more time to the subject. His anatomical studies, visible through his notebooks and detailed sketches, show remarkable precision. For example, a notebook dated around 1512 includes one of the first known drawings of a child in the womb. Around 1510, Da Vinci met and collaborated with Marc Antonio della Torre, a renowned anatomist. Torre, born in Verona in 1481, was the son of a medical professor. He trained in medicine and philosophy and went on to teach at the University of Padua and later at the University of Pavia. However, much of his work has not survived. Marc Antonio della Torre's work remains today, despite his premature death at the age of 30, likely from cholera or the plague. While many scholars credit the excellence and accuracy of Leonardo's anatomical drawings to his collaboration with Torre, others argue that Da Vinci had been studying anatomy long before Torre's birth. Based on his notebooks, it is believed that Da Vinci dissected more than 30 human corpses, with his anatomical studies peaking in the early 1500s and resulting in approximately 200 detailed drawings of the human body. However, unlike other Renaissance artists who dissected bodies to create studies for their paintings, Da Vinci's motivation was a deep curiosity about the anatomy itself rather than for the sake of a specific artistic project. The dissection process would have been unpleasant, as religious doctrine required dissections to be conducted at night, and the activity was likely to arouse suspicion. Meanwhile, in 1512, the Sforzas made an attempt to return to power in Milan when Ludovico Sforza's son, Massimiliano, born in 1493, returned to the city with military backing from Switzerland. Despite this effort, the combined forces of France and Venice pushed the Sforzas out again, and Massimiliano eventually settled in Paris. A decade later, Ludovico's other son, Francesco Sforza, regained the title of Duke of Milan, appointed by Charles V. However, he was the last Sforza to hold this title during this period. Amid these continuing power struggles, Leonardo moved to live with Francesco Melgi, a 20-year-old who would remain a close companion and potentially a lover for the rest of Leonardo's life. After Leonardo's death, Melgi took control of many of his journals and artworks. On 24 September 1513, Leonardo, accompanied by Melgi and Salai, left Milan for Rome. There, they were hosted in the Belvedere of the Vatican by Giuliano di Medici, the son of Lorenzo di Medici and brother of the newly appointed Pope Leo X, Giovanni di Medici. Many artists, including Raphael and Michelangelo, journeyed to Rome in these years to gain the Pope's favor. During his time in Rome from 1513 to 1516, Leonardo was approached by Pope Leo X to help design a plan for draining the Pontine Marshes, a malaria-infested area that was largely uninhabitable at the time. Although Leonardo's designs were not implemented for this project, they can be viewed today in the Royal Collection at Windsor Castle. Rome, still recovering from the Great Schism, which had concluded in 1417, was experiencing a drive to centralize power within the Vatican. This period, known as the High Renaissance, was marked by a flourishing of art and culture, with artists like Leonardo being pivotal to its development. In 1516, Leonardo, Melgi, and Salai continued their journey, marking another significant chapter in his later years. In 1516, Leonardo sailed to France, the same year that King Francis I of France invaded and captured Milan, once again forcing the Sforzas from power. Unable to find work and patrons in Italy, Leonardo settled in France, where he became the official painter for King Francis I. Francis, who became King of France on 1 January 1515, following the death of Louis XII, had married Louis XII's daughter, Claude, shortly before the king's death. Historians note that Francis invited Leonardo to his court primarily to engage in daily conversations, a practice that became a routine for the two. While in France, Leonardo and his companion Melgi lived in the small village of Claux, in a manor provided by King Francis. It was here that Leonardo created his famous self-portrait, drawn in red chalk, now housed in the Royal Library of Turin in Italy. The drawing, estimated to have been made around 1512, depicts Leonardo at the age of 60. Some scholars suggest that by this time, Leonardo may have been experiencing paralysis, a claim based on an analysis of his writings, including a sheet from October 1517 in the Codex Atlantico. This large collection of Leonardo's thoughts and sketches, consisting of 1,119 sheets dating from 1478 to 1519, provides valuable insight into his final years. Some scholars believe that the ragged, unclear shading lines in his later works suggest that, while Leonardo retained movement in his fingers, he had lost control of his arm. Many of Leonardo's works in his later years became apocalyptic in nature, reflecting themes of great floods and brute force. As his life drew to a close, He focused on organizing his vast collection of notes, though he was unable to complete this task due to the sheer volume of his writings. Leonardo da Vinci passed away on 2 May 1519 at the age of 67. He was buried at the Church of Saint Florentin in Amboise, France. Unfortunately, the church was demolished in 1802, leading to the loss of the final resting place of one of the greatest minds and artists of the Renaissance. Leonardo left behind not only numerous frescoes and paintings but also an invaluable legacy of notebooks, which are said to have numbered around 20,000 pages. Of the approximately 20,000 pages Leonardo da Vinci is believed to have written, only about 7,000 have survived. Today, some of these pages are held in Milan and England, while others have been compiled and published as the Trattato della Pittura. This work consists of 8 books and 935 chapters, and serves as a vital source of Leonardo's views on art and science. Interestingly, Leonardo expressed a strong desire to bridge the gap between these two fields, believing it was his mission to establish art as a respected science. He also believed that art had a godlike ability to recreate and distill the natural world. The notebooks reflect Leonardo's fascination with a variety of subjects, including water, flight, and human anatomy. From a young age, he was captivated by the power of water, particularly after witnessing the flooding of the Arno River. This experience may have deepened his interest in the destructive power of nature and humanity's potential to harness such forces. Leonardo was also intrigued by the possibility of human flight. In 1485, he sketched what is considered one of the first designs for a parachute. This parachute, shaped like a pyramid, was tested successfully on 26 June 2000 by English skydiver Adrian Nicholas. A leading figure of the High Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci was not only a painter but also a mathematician, architect, and innovator. His dedication to exploration and experimentation, whether within the human body, the sky, or through new painting techniques, set him apart. Although often restricted by the political and social challenges of his time, including the need to move across Italy and France to find patrons and stability, these limitations allowed him to explore a multitude of paths during his lifetime. While he was primarily known as an artist, a closer examination of his notebooks after his death revealed the depth of his contributions to engineering, mathematics, and science. Leonardo attained fame and influence during his lifetime, but his legacy grew even more after his death, despite the fact that he completed few of his projects. Questions remain about the extent of his involvement in many of the works attributed to him, and his paintings have often undergone repairs and restorations over the years. Centuries have passed since Leonardo da Vinci created his masterpieces, leading some to question the extent to which modern audiences can fully appreciate his artistic talent. Though his illegitimate birth restricted him from certain opportunities, da Vinci, despite these setbacks, or perhaps because of them, as some historians suggest, excelled. However, there were numerous instances where he failed to complete works he had been commissioned and paid for. In other cases, such as his experimentation with painting mediums in The Last Supper, his innovative efforts did not produce the desired results, costing us the chance to view his work in its full glory. But, as with other great minds throughout history, we must ask, what is innovation without risk? What do you think of Leonardo da Vinci? Does he truly deserve his status as the Renaissance man, or has his influence been exaggerated at the expense of other important contributors to this period of European history? Please share your thoughts in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to stop subscribing and leave your like so that the channel can reach more people in order to learn about the stories of our world.